Hey everybody, and welcome to our first ever live stream Pro2Pro event. We're really excited about it. I have Nick Schiffer here, a local builder in the Boston, Mass market.
Yeah, Nick Schiffer with NS Builders, also the co-host of the Modern Craftsman Podcast.
And I'm Ross Trethewey. You may know me from Future House, but I'm also a mechanical engineer. And we're going to be talking through things that homeowners want to know about, things in our day-to-day professions that we deal with, and trying to basically dumb things down, right? So that the average person can understand it. So the two topics today we really want to focus on is air sealing and insulation of the building, as well as ventilation within the building.
And now not only that, but also talking to contractors and basically helping them, narrate what we're going to talk about today to homeowners and their potential clients.
Right. So I want to thank our partner at Home Advisor for their support of the show. And I also want to let you know that we are streaming on thishouse.com, YouTube, Facebook, and the Daily Motion. So if you have any questions regarding anything we're talking about, please post, please write in, and we'll try to answer those questions as much as we can. All right?
Now, I know we primarily do renovation. So the first thing our homeowners are usually talking to us about are windows and doors.
Everyone's focused on windows, right?
Right, and I get it, because we're gonna do a full gut renovation, partial gut, whatever it is. The first area that they're remembering that's uncomfortable are their windows. Leaky windows, they're sitting at the couch, the wind blows by, it's getting drafty.
Right.
And it's certainly not a bad idea. That's a perfect opportunity. Let's upgrade the windows. But I think the common misconception is that upgrading the windows is gonna relate into a better
energy savings.
Yeah. Where it's not. It's more of a comfortability thing.
Right.
But
right.
And the reason being is the size of it.
Right. I mean, you think about a wall of a building, right? Only a small portion of it is the actual window. The rest of it's the wall. And so if I had $1 to spend, I'm going all day into wall insulation.
Right, because we can go from an R1 to an R2, R3. You're double, tripling that R value.
Right.
But in the wall, you could potentially be 10, 20, 30 times the original R value.
We got a question from Mark from Virginia. He's looking to install a corrugated metal ceiling in an unfinished portion of the basement. The ceiling is currently bare, so I don't see any joists, subfloor above. Is there anything I need to do beforehand to insulate between the joists, install a vapor barrier, or can I just screw the sheets into the joists? Okay, so it sounds like he's looking to install a metal ceiling in an unfinished portion of his basement.
So it sounds like he wants to finish the basement and possibly insulate from the living space above, or have concerns. So I guess obviously we don't know if he's heating or cooling the basement.
True.
But let's assume that he wants to separate the climate.
Sure.
I think, and we can speak to a couple different products, but insulating the ceiling, in my opinion, is never a bad idea. Whether it's for sound, and with metal's going to make some sound. So if you do have say noise in the basement, or you're entertaining in the basement, stuff's going to reflect off that metal. So to separate that space, we can talk about it, from a sound thing. And I think I'd go a mineral wool where it has that dense pack to it.
Yeah, I think the key thing is if the basement is going to be part of the conditioned space and we don't have to worry about a vapor barrier, then I think all of the products that we have here today are one that you could consider. Mineral wool being probably the one, the best one to think about. Let's go through the options. All right?
Yeah. So we start with fiberglass. This is kind of our, this gets us to code. And the way I look at it is code is the D+. You pass, but you basically did the bare minimum here.
Bare minimum, yeah.
The benefits to it, cost. It's going to be your cheapest option for insulation.
Sure.
You're roughly, what, an R 3.5?
3.5 per inch, yeah, for the fiberglass, yep.
And then, I think our next step would go right into a mineral wool. Now, this is where we start. I don't install any fiberglass.
So this is your first option.
This is our first option. I think it's an R4.2 per inch. It's denser. It actually does not promote or support mildew and mold. Where if this gets wet, it's ruined. It's got to come out before it does possibly cause any mold issues.
So we got these for cavity installations. We also have some other cavity installations behind us, right? So we got dense pack cellulose.
So this is something I actually don't use a lot of.
Okay.
Usually we go from that and we skip right to the spray foam.
Yeah.
Very rare does that come up, but speak to the benefit of that.
Yeah, so dense pack cellulose is great for when you are doing a retrofit installation. So if you're retrofitting a building and you got cavity wall insulation, but you're leaving the exterior sheathing on, or you're leaving the interior board insulation, you could put two holes, one at the midpoint of the wall and one at the top of the wall, and you could fill those cavities with dense pack cellulose, and you'll fill the whole cavity right up and insulate. It's basically ground up newspaper. So it's a great product. It doesn't do a great job of air, and it's not a vapor barrier for any means. So so it's a great product, but know that it's not going to do the same kind of air sealing and vapor barrier that like a closed cell foam would.
Right. So we have two options of foam. We have the closed cell and we have the open cell. Now, this is something I actually just recently learned, is that you can install a closed cell based on the rating of it into an existing cavity, meaning you could do something very similar to the cellulose, where you drill a hole from the inside outside and you fill that cavity up, because it's not going to expand
on the lighter density foams.
On the lighter density. Where the closed cell, absolutely not. You fill that cavity up, it's going to blow the drywall off the wall.
The benefit of the closed cell spray foam is that you apply it, and as it gets applied, it gives you an air barrier, a vapor barrier, and it gives you the highest R value per inch. So it's usually what we spec out on our projects as kind of like our A standard. It's a great product. It does have some, there are pros and cons to any decision.
Well, I'm gonna fight you on this. So, I see the benefit of closed cell, and we do use it in a lot of our projects. One thing that I think is commonly mistaken is that it's easy. Now, it's easy in the sense that you're getting the most R value. You're spending a little bit more money up front. You're getting the most R value. You're air sealing. You're not adding a vapor barrier.
Sure.
But the installation is way more important than I think people realize, because it's very easy to, you could mix it wrong.
It's risky.
It's very risky. Yeah. So, making sure you have a qualified and a licensed installer is super important when you come to a closed cell. A proper installation, absolutely. But with the risk of, having those mistakes during installation can be detrimental in the project itself.
Right. You got to make sure you're dealing with a licensed and verified installer.
Right. And for us, and the way I look at it is, if we're engineering this as a global project, meaning, rather than framing the house and saying, what are we doing for insulation? All right, well, maybe we'll do, this for cavity insulation. Let's step back and really design this process up front and look at this as a global engineered home.
So Jim has a question: is insulation good in interior walls too, related to heat zones? So I'm a huge fan of insulating all walls, whether they're interior walls or exterior walls. Exterior is a must, but interior walls are great too for sound reasons, right? So never mind just the thermal performance of interior walls. The fact that you can get a sound barrier between walls is great. But also, if those rooms are going to be shut down, what I mean by that is, if I'm going to have some rooms that might be at 50 or 60 degrees and some rooms that are heated to 70 degrees, if that's the case, then that insulation is going to help you with heat migration from one room to the other.
Right.
So it still is a benefit in interior walls versus exterior walls.
You look at it, if you're going to have multiple thermostats on, on different floors, you can, basically you set a thermostat in the master, which is super common for us. We insulate all the walls in the master bedroom. One thing to note is, this isn't going to be your traditional interior wall insulation. You're going to go back to a bat. Whether it's a rock, it's the mineral wool or the fiberglass.
Right. So Raptor Crazy asked a question, a great name. What is the R value for each insulation type? So we're going to want to go through that. So your fiberglass bat is going to be about 3.5 per inch. Your mineral wool is going to be roughly about 4.2 per inch, give or take. Your dense pack cellulose is going to be in about that 4, maybe 4.5 R value per inch. Your closed cell spray foam is going to be roughly 6 to 7 R value per inch, so that's obviously the highest. And then your open cell spray foam insulation is going to be probably in that 3.5 to 4.2 range. So, if you consider all of them, they're all roughly about the same R value per inch, except for the closed cell. That's the one that's very different.
Right, and from a cost implication, spray foam from fiberglass to closed cell, is about, I've seen historically about 3 to 4 times as much as fiberglass. But you think that if we're 3.5 and this is our 6.77, you're actually double the R value per inch. So you're offsetting some of that cost. Not to mention, you don't need to put a vapor barrier.
Right. Yeah, it's one-time sprayed.
Right.
So Brandon has a question: with ground-up newspaper, will it eventually compact, and will you have to add more over time? It's a good question. The key with cellulose, especially in a wall assembly, is it's got to be dense packed, right? So you can have different levels of spray in terms of the cellulose being applied in that wall. If you densely pack that wall very good, and you have a good insulating contractor on your team, you shouldn't need to add any more insulation over time.
Yeah,
you might get a little bit of settling over time, but for the most part, that wall is going to be fully compacted.
So oftentimes in an attic, they do like a loose fill.
Right.
So that eventually would, over time, it's going to go everywhere, and you don't have that compaction where that's really, you're compacting something solid against something solid.
And the other thing too, Brandon, is that with dense packed, it's usually a water base. So you're spraying it with a little bit of water, so it acts almost like as a binding agent, and it will help keep the cellulose, in its form like it is right here, without being loose. Okay.
Now, I spoke about looking at this globally, and you brought this awesome example here of an ERV. And I'm going to let you get to explaining what an ERV is.
Sure.
But I like the fact that, and this isn't on all of these units, but I like the fact that you graphically explain what's going on.
Right.
So, for us as a contractor or even a homeowner, seeing it visually and understanding what this unit does and why it's so important, this is helpful.
Right.
Now, this is mandated when you're specifically to you when you're dealing with closed cell, because you're building a tight home, and that's something that comes up in argument a lot of the times, that we're building homes too tight. But let's argue that and say, you have to build the home tight, but you also have to ventilate it. And we can't rely on the fact that you're going to open and close doors and windows to ventilate it correctly. And we want to get that stale air out of the home.
When you build a house so tightly and you spend all that money, the fact is it doesn't breathe like old homes do. So that's where this type of product comes into play. So this is called an energy recovery ventilator, or ERV. A lot of people often refer to this as a heat recovery ventilator, or HRV.
But those are actually different.
It's different. You're absolutely right. So energy recovery ventilator does heat and moisture transfer. So we're doing temperature exchange and moisture exchange. With a heat recovery ventilator, we're only dealing with heat, right? So to me, energy recovery ventilators are going to be the better bet, because you don't have condensate, you don't have liquid water being produced, so you don't have to deal with that. And so that means this can be in unconditioned spaces. So in attics and basements, that's where these can reside. So that's great. You can see it's got 4 ducted connections, right? So these are 6-inch round ducted collars. And what the way the sticker, I think, helps explain what's happening here. So outside air comes through, hits this filter, goes through the heat exchanger or an energy exchanger, and comes into the building. While that's happening, we're also taking room air or exhaust air from the house, going through this filter, going through the core, and bringing that outside. So we basically have a glorified energy or heat exchanger that's going to take 32-degree outside air and bump it up to 59 degrees, right, to enter the house. We're preheating and actually pre-humidifying that air in the wintertime. And the flip side, it happens in the summertime where we get 95-degree air that's now going to enter the house at 81.
And that's because we're pulling, so room air, we're specifically speaking of the rooms with bad air quality, bathrooms and kitchens.
That's right.
So we're pulling there's a ductwork that's pulling air from those rooms, running it across through the core, and basically heating that core up, so when this cold air comes in, it's basically warming that, but that air never infiltrates each other.
Right.
It's just a cross path to.
There's no mixing whatsoever. They don't come in contact with each other.
Right.
It's just coming in contact through this core. Right
So if you can envision, I'm standing on the exterior side of this unit, and I have 6-inch ductwork. One goes to pull
both
in
of these
air.
are going outside.
Right, and one is blowing the stale air out.
Yep. So 2 duct connections to the outside, usually spaced 10 feet apart. One's the intake duct, which is coming here. One's the exhaust duct going outside, right? So that means we're going to get fresh air in, we get exhaust air out. These 2 duct connections are either standalone, meaning going to the house itself, or they're being connected to the actual if it's a centrally ducted system, you could tie that in there too. So in most cases, we're pulling from kitchens and bathrooms, like you said, and we're replacing the air to bedrooms and living rooms and stuff like that.
And the reason that we're putting it into the bedroom is basically or the bedroom and the living room, is that's where you're spending most of your time.
Right.
So if we want constant fresh air in the home, and you're going to want to notice it, to the point where you feel more comfortable in the home, I mean, I think it's super important that you're putting it in the rooms that you spend the most of the time.
So Colleen has a question. She asked, how challenging is it to retrofit an ERV? So the good thing is, if you've got mechanical space already in your house, whether it's in the basement or the attic, this should be a pretty easy retrofit, right? You need 2 duct connections, like I said, to the outside, one for intake air, one for exhaust air. But if you have that space, it should be a pretty easy retrofit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty compact unit, and beyond this, it's just ductwork.
Yeah.
So if you have access to spread those, the intake and exhaust by 10 feet, and then you can supply it, whether it's to your current, forced hot air system, or you're supplying it directly to those rooms and pulling it directly from the bathroom and kitchen.
That's right. Yeah, I get often asked, how expensive is it to install an ERV? It's going to range depending on the size of the ERV, the size of the house. Typically you're looking somewhere between $1,500 and maybe $3,000 on the high end.
And that's and that's based on what the home needs and the square footage.
That's right.
Now, I think one thing I get asked a lot is, how many do I need?
Right.
So if I have 2 air handlers in the home, one, say, you know, traditionally we have one in the basement that feeds the first floor, and then we have one in the attic that feeds, you know, the second floor.
Right.
So do I need to put both?
Well, in a perfect world, yes. You'd have an ERV for the first floor tied into the first floor system, and you'd have an ERV for the second floor tied in during the second floor system. But that's usually not going to be cost effective.
Right, and you said in the perfect world.
In a perfect world, right. So in reality, what we recommend is we have at least one of these in the house, and typically that's installed where the bedrooms are. That's going to be on the second floor in most cases.
Going back to our point,
tied into that
where
system.
we spend most of the time in the home.
That's right, that's right. And so most people misconstrue ventilation for filtration. Right. So there's definitely a difference here. Here's a used filter. This is a pleated filter. It's a 1-inch filter, 14 by 20. You can see the dimensions right on it. But this is going to filter contaminants within the building. But the off-gassing that happens from different furniture and from rugs and carpets and different, you know, lacquers or whatever's installed in that house, it's going to off-gas. So filters aren't going to do much for that. And so that's where the ERV product is really going to make a difference, because you're actually exhausting air out of the house and you're bringing in fresh outside air.
Right, and that to further on that, this is just, it's recycling the air.
Right.
So yeah, the filter may be similar coming for this unit, but you're actually bringing fresh air outside, filtered fresh air.
Right.
You know, and a lot of people say, well, in a leaky home or in an old home, they were built better because they automatically, you know, leak, right? And they automatically filter. But if you think about the air coming through a stud bay cavity, it's going to have this, if not worse, you know, in that stud cavity. So when you're filtering air through that space, you're actually picking up more contaminants.
That's right.
And you're really not doing a very good job.
No. We have a question from Jeff asks, what would be the best way to deal with the humidity with an ERV in humid climates? So that is what this is perfectly designed for. Whether it's an arid or humid climate, that's where the ERV really comes into play. With an HRV, you're typically going to have issues. You know, there used to be a chart that said HRV is used in the north and ERV is used in the south, almost like a Mason-Dixon line. And that's actually not true. ERVs are going to be more beneficial actually in the south, and they're still going to be beneficial in the north. So it's one of those things where this type of product is perfectly designed for the southwest, southeast of this country, but also northeast and northwest of this country.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, I oftentimes see a lot of other builders, they're putting the HRV in a lot of the homes in the north, and I think it goes back to that whole, you know, comment about that Mason-Dixon line. Right. Like that's what the chart says, right?
Right.
But understanding that you can pull the humidity out of you know, the air and replenish it back into your fresh air source. Yeah. I mean, I don't see a reason why, you know, we wouldn't use an ERV at all in both climate zones.
Yeah. This is it. I mean, it works both north and south, east and west. But you know, you got to look at the holistic picture, right? So filtration's part of the package, ERVs are part of the package, the right insulation and vapor barrier is part of the package, and it just depends on where you are, right? All right, so let's talk about the cost implications for homeowners.
Right. The way, going back to my global comment, right? We have to look at, you know, this as how much this project is going to cost globally, the whole house, not just how much I want to spend on windows or how much I want to spend on insulation. You know, everything is a system in this place. And taking the step back to really consider it as a system and look at it as, you know, here's my bucket of money and where can I allocate those funds and what's going to make the most sense. And you said if you had $1, you'd start with insulation because that is your biggest contributing factor to the comfort of your home. Right. But when you're dealing with insulation, if you're super well insulated, you need to ventilate.
That's right.
So now we're getting into ventilation. Windows and doors, they play a big factor in the comfortability of the home, but they, you know, we can offset our mechanical cost by making the building envelope, you know, tighter and, you know, ventilate correctly.
The example I give to most homeowners is that we could either put in a bigger furnace or a bigger air handler or bigger air conditioning unit, or we could go with a better insulated envelope and we could reduce the size of our mechanical system.
Right.
And that to me is the real, you know, the real great thing going forward. All right, so I want to thank everybody for their questions today. I had a great time. Nick, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And so, signing off, thank you very much.